Hi, this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer for Community Culture Showcase. And I have a wonderful program today because I have with me a wonderful guest from the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center. That is an incredibly active and wonderful organization that helps people in our community. And I have piggybacked on with them to do some creative writing stuff. So we'll talk about that as well. But I want to introduce Susan to you, and Susan will tell you about this fabulous organization, a hidden gem in our community. We want you to know about it. Take it away, Susan.
Oh, hi. Well, thank you, Harriet, for having me on. Yes, we're very excited to have you join the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center as a writer to teach our writing class. The history behind the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center is that it started in 1986, believe it or not, with a group of Stonington residents who just wanted to have a place where they could have parties and scouting events, but we always had a food pantry. Today, our food pantry is up to 1,800 people who come on a regular basis.
Wow.
Yeah. They can come once a week.
That's a show of the times, which isn't necessarily good.
Absolutely,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes,
So
yes.
It's wonderful, though. We, as you saw, we have a community garden that last year yielded 2,000 pounds of vegetables.
Wow.
We get our food from Gemma Moran Food Pantry, Connecticut Food Bank, and really primarily from all of the donations of people who either stop by and will bring us non-perishable items, or will send us money so we can go and buy what we need. But I think you saw the downstairs. We have very large walk-in freezers and refrigerators. So folks are getting milk and eggs and produce from local farms and keeping healthy. We also have a second program. Once a week, it's food that's given to children who get free or reduced school lunches. So those meals are a little different. We try to make them kid-friendly. We might throw in something like chicken nuggets and also rutabaga just to try it. So we really do try to teach folks how to eat in a well-balanced way. And then we also have the pet shop. We have pet food that we give out no cost. We have toiletries and diapers and formula. So we're really serving babies, actually from before the babies are born, all the way to our seniors. So in 2007, we put on another edition, which we call our Senior Center. Right now, that's what you're working with, teaching our creative writing class. And primarily, it had been a class where folks could come and tell their life story, because I think for most seniors, and I consider myself a senior as well, I'm starting now to talk to my cousins and my brothers and sisters about our parents and our grandparents, and they're gone now. And people always say, you got to write that down. You have to tell that story, but we don't take that opportunity. So your class does that. So I actually wanted to ask you, Harriet, how does your class do that? Do people pick a topic? Do you pick the topic, or how does it work?
Well, we've had a mixed show of people who have appeared, so that some people have what you had in mind initially, and that is to write their story. So there is one of the people who comes fairly regularly, and she is actually interested in writing her autobiography.
Okay.
She had some pivotal experiences in her lifetime,
Right.
and she wants to capture that. And so what I try to do as a published author is to provide some kind of alternatives, which is a little bit different than people who had been there originally.
Right.
I try to provide what I think is some potential options about how do you go ahead and do this writing. So if you're interested in writing an autobiography, you could do it the easiest way, of course, is just simply go by chronology. Born, grew up, blah, blah, blah. Here I am in life.
Right.
But in this case, the writer had as I said, a pivotal moment in their history, their personal history. And I thought, well, instead of writing a chronology as an autobiography, start at that event.
Right.
Or events.
Right.
Maybe a year or two in your life where you really decided that your life was going to go in a very different direction. Right. And then go backwards, and then maybe go forwards into the future. Again, these are only suggestions I make. I try to do that because these people seem serious about what they want to do, and there are more than one way to write anything. So I offer my experience as a writer to them to see whether or not they like that or not. And if they don't like it, well, that's all right.
And I think that is a really good point, because sometimes we have a few pivotal moments in all of our lives where we say, I want to write about this one event. But I've also noticed by what people told me in the prior classes, if you receive a prompt, and the one that comes to mind is, have you ever saved someone's life? That's a really good prompt, because suddenly you think about, like for myself, I thought about a time when I was swimming in a pool and my neighbor started to drown, and I saved her, and we were like 11. But I never would have thought about that. It was a dramatic moment, but it's been so long since that happened. So it really is a nice opportunity to have a published author like yourself give these kind of prompts and people, and also to hear each other. I don't know if you all listen. Do you listen to each other?
We do, and we try not to be cruel.
Oh no.
And just trying to be kind and listen to everybody what they might have written. I do. So it's interesting because I did some prompts with people of a kind of just taking something ordinary and make it special. So I said to people, write as if you're on a bus, and you peer across the little whatever space to the next seats, and you see a young couple with their legs touching. What does that say to you?
Oh,
That's a little bit more into the descriptive, into what are they thinking, how are they feeling, kind of thing.
Right.
Because everybody has that experience.
Right.
I bet you not too many people actually saved a classmate's life.
Right.
But everybody's been on a bus or somewhere, and they've seen something.
Right.
So yes, we do try to do little prompts, and I give people, I wouldn't call it homework, but I kind of give them some kind of idea, because in my mind, a good writer is somebody who reads a lot.
Yes.
So, and it could be all kinds of stuff, magazines, newspapers, nonfiction, fiction, biography, whatever. But you have to keep on reading. And so I give my class, sometimes I give them assignments. I say, all right, the master of short stories in this world is actually the Canadian writer Alice Munro, who is as far as I know, the only Nobel Literature winner who only wrote short stories.
Right.
And as we get older, we tend to lose interest in something that's 900 pages, but if something is 20 pages, they might be more likely to. So short stories, I think, is a good way to get people started, if they haven't been reading, to start reading. So I gave them, go to the library, you don't have to buy it, go out and read one or two of Alice Munro's short stories. And people had not heard of her, even though she's won the Nobel Prize. And some people liked it, didn't like it, but she is really well known for bringing you into a story, and it seems absolutely ordinary. And at the end, you are sometimes surprised. You're actually sometimes shocked by what she has to say.
Right.
So that's what makes her kind of a master of storytelling. So again, that's a suggestion. The other thing that's very common is in her writing is she's highly descriptive. When she writes about a person, you see them on a bus stop, you will recognize them immediately.
Right.
But as I was explaining to the class, that kind of concept of being highly descriptive is in literature something of a fashion. It comes and it goes.
That's true.
Sometimes it's very big, and then other times it fades, and the more loosely written kinds of stories are much more fashionable.
Right.
The Nobel Prize is for a lifetime of achievement, so this is the way she's always written, although, again, maybe her stuff is not always in fashion. And then I talked about sparseness. Now, the master of sparseness in writing is like Ernest Hemingway.
Yes.
So I said, well, take a look and read a little bit about Ernest Hemingway. The other thing that he's very well known for is that he uses dialogue to move forward a narrative. And that's something that I like to do myself. And so that's again, it's a technique. Right. So although people might be simply wanting to write their stories about to their grandchildren or their children, whatever, I like that to have some focus.
Right.
And I think by just giving these little tidbits to people, it brings them more into focus about why and what they're going to write. So, for example, we have one writer who comes fairly frequently, And she is just a pistol as a human being. And she has been around the world many, many times over. She is well traveled. She has a home in Italy. So, and she's worked for the Navy for years and years. And she wants to write a travel book.
Oh.
So I said to her, okay, you could just write out, get an outline, because this is an easy thing for an outline. What do you want to eat? What do you see? What are the attractions? Something about the people, maybe a little bit about their history. And I said, but better than, and then she started to think about that, and I said, and she was sort of getting lost, and I said, well, how about take it like this? If you were going to write a travel book and they had 5 days to see this community, what would you do on day 1? What would you do day 2? Right. Again, a different way of approaching that. And I think that being a published author, and had someone who has written for decades and decades, since my college days writing music reviews, I have this experience where I can guide you. I'm not necessarily going to write like Alice Munro. I only wish God I could do that. And I sure as heck aren't going to be writing like Hemingway. But I can offer these kinds of suggestions to make it richer, deeper, more meaningful.
And I think that's probably what a lot of people are looking for, because, I mean, I think anyone even watching this show is thinking, well, I would like to write either a story about myself or, like you said, somewhere that I've gone, but you don't know where to start, and you have that blank page. So sometimes it's just a matter of showing up and having the blank page and seeing where it goes. And I think I've noticed, because I'm always booking these various classes, I really do say to people, just step out the door. Just come into the building. And people will often say, where is the building? I've never been there, naturally. But don't you think that's the key? It's like we all have to get out of our comfort zone, no matter what our age is. And it's so easy for us when we have children to say, I'm signing you up for this class and go do this class. But somewhere along the line, a lot of us, as we become adults, we just stay very comfortable, and we don't do that ourselves. So it's nice, Harriet, that you're offering this to people, because you have so much to offer, and also for people to have the chance to listen to other people's stories. I love hearing, I generally read biographies or autobiographies myself, because I just love hearing people's stories. And even though you had that one woman who's traveled all over the world, some people become very wise in the small little world that they're in. You don't have to go all over the world to have a really interesting story. So I can just imagine your class could be really, really exciting.
Well, I hope so, and because writing is one of those wonderful tools. I mean, there are people who I know who go through all kinds of therapy, and they write journals. Oh, yeah. And I think that's a wonderful thing, because you can express yourself perhaps on a page versus confronting another human being. So you also get into your own ghosts and goblins and all the things that are tearing you apart. You write them down, right, and you feel better. I have an interesting thing about my mother. She used to, she didn't have a really hot temper, but she was the one with an elephant's memory. Oh. So what she would do is, if someone really got under her, she would write a letter to them and then either burn it up or throw it away.
Wow.
And that was her process,
right,
of dealing with confrontation. And
she really would do this?
Oh, absolutely, most of her life.
So she was really ahead of her time, because I know we hear about doing that, but I never really heard of anyone who said she really would. So did she ever give you a letter?
No. I have to say that. But she did, and
That's smart.
She did this all her life.
Wow.
And she recently passed. I wear a bracelet that was hers, and I never take it off.
Oh, and what is it? What does it represent?
It actually is, people think it's Egyptian masks, but I don't think so. My mother was never, I don't think, ever in Egypt. It's Mexican. It's Aztec.
Okay.
She had been in Mexico many times, and I think that she got this bracelet, and when she passed, I put it on, and I just never take it off.
Oh, that's
so,
nice.
I keep her close to me.
Yes.
And so she had other kind, like I was talking about, she used to swim 3 times a week.
Yeah.
She lived to be 99. She used to take yoga.
Yeah.
She thought it was good for your soul as well as for your waistline.
Yes.
So she had all these kinds of interesting things that she picked on. Mm-hmm. other than that, I mean, she did travel. She traveled more than some people had done at her age. And listen, she went and experienced everything. I mean, she died at 99. Mm-hmm. She had lived through a couple of wars, world wars. Mm-hmm. She had lived through the Depression. She had lived through a bunch of major changes in America. Mm-hmm. And she was born here in the United States. One of her parents was born in Europe, and her father was born in the United States, in Jersey City, New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And I use my family as a linchpin for writing my stories and my own experiences. You know, they always say, when you're first starting out, write something that you know. I don't necessarily think that you have to do that. Right. But during COVID, as a writer, you're kind of isolated anyway. Right. And I wrote 2 books, and both of them look backwards. So one of the first ones to look backwards is what we're going to discuss.
Wait, you wrote this during COVID? I didn't realize this.
Yes,
okay.
So this book is called Rockaway Riptides, and it's by me, and it's the ocean. I grew up by the ocean. And the story, the pivotal story in here, is about the Vietnam War.
Okay.
And we're going to have a wonderful program about Vietnam, because the end of this month is actually a national day of saluting Vietnam War veterans. And they, unfortunately, are getting sick. Some of them are actually dying off. So we want to have a program that salutes them. And I invited not only myself with this particular book, but also the playwright, David Kirshner, who has written a play called The Wall. He is a Navy veteran of Vietnam, and we're going to take his playwriting skills, and he's going to do a performance, and I'm going to do a book reading, and we're going to talk about what it was like to kind of live under this shadow of Vietnam growing up. So I grew up in the 1960s. My novel starts to take place in 1965 into 1966. And the pivotal story within my own story is the fact that my classmate who graduated the year before comes home in a body bag from Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And he's one of the very first of the school to actually die there. He's not the only one. Subsequently, a few other of our young men who graduated from Far Rockaway High School went on to serve and unfortunately didn't come home. Thousands served and luckily did come home, although they might bear some scars, the fact that they did come home. Mm-hmm. And I think David has that first-person experience that really shakes it. I am a young kid, in terms of this book, experiencing it and not quite knowing what to do, because when you're 16, 17, 18 years old, you think you're going to live forever. Right. You do not believe for a moment that you could die. In fact, that's why kids were signing up for the Marines and the Army, because they figured, well, they'll serve and, you know, they'll get some experiences. Well, you know, some of them got experiences that they had never anticipated, right, and came home with, if not visual wounds, they came home with invisible wounds. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, some of them came home like I call him Carmine in the book. Big C is what I call him. Because when you're a kid, 16, 17, 18, you always have nicknames.
All right.
Right? So my characters all have nicknames because that's the way we sort of grew up as kids. Right. You know, didn't have a real name. You had a nickname. And sometimes it followed you throughout your lifetime. Right. So that is everybody, I want you invited to come on March 31st. It's a Thursday.
This Thursday, actually.
A week from Thursday.
A week from Thursday, yes, at 11, and 11 it's a lunch and learn.
Yes, and it is a free lunch. These guys make a very good lunch.
Yes.
And anybody who buys my books at that event, I'm making a donation to the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center because they do an incredible job for the community.
Well, thank you.
And we
Harriet.
should do as much as we possibly can to support them.
Well, I'm very excited that you are having this on that day. And we've also invited the veterans who attend we have a Veterans Coffee House, which is sponsored by another agency, TVCCA, and that's on the second and the fourth Thursday of the month at the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center. So I'm hoping those veterans will come along, and our seniors who attend all of our other classes, I hope that they will be there. I'm really looking forward to hearing. I didn't realize you wrote this during COVID. I'm amazed by that, Harriet. And does your story take place only in those years that you mentioned?
Yes, it's my senior year in high school.
Okay.
Which was, and the Vietnam War is starting, right? 1965, the book opens, 1965, we begin to, as Americans, because the French had been there before and left, we didn't learn the lesson from the French, and we decided we were going to be able to do it better. And we start to come in 1965. And the book chronicles all the events of, during that one-year period of the war itself. So all the battles that occurred during the war are actually in the book.
Okay.
And sometimes, unfortunately, the losses we also suffered. And not only us, but the Canadians, the Australians. There were a number of countries that were involved.
And David's play, The Wall, what is that about?
I believe it's exactly about his naval experiences.
Okay.
And during Vietnam, you don't think of the Navy or even the Coast Guard as being involved in war, but in this war, they are very much involved. So guys who went into the Coast Guard thinking, oh, you know, I'm not going to be involved. Well, some of them were actually sent because there are lots of little waterways.
Right.
And where the Navy couldn't go with its big ships, the Coast Guard went with really smaller ships.
Right.
So there was, you know, that activity was going on.
And I think that it's really nice that we're having two different viewpoints, because you have a veteran who was fighting. You have a senior in high school who's looking at it from the point of view of my friends this age are over there fighting. And I would imagine that anyone who's in the room is somehow affected by war, because we all are. I didn't tell you, but I was a child of a Korean War Marine. So, and I actually majored in political science when I went to college. And I think now, you know, at this age, when I look back at it, I think I was always trying to find out what had happened to my father when he was in Korea, because he fought there for 7 years. He brought back a lot of friends who didn't come back with him. And I think we you know, you didn't hear about PTSD in those days. And he went on to have 5 children and raised a very good family. But you always knew that those wounds haunted him, and they were invisible, as you said. And so I think that as a society, we have to never forget what our veterans are doing right now, and what they've done for us. And the way that we remember them is to tell stories. And that's what life is all about, telling stories. And you made that good point that folks like to go to a writing class and maybe write out their story. And some people do it by painting or by drawing, and that's why we have those art classes. We all need a medium so we can somehow express ourselves. And especially during COVID, a lot of us were at home, obviously, most of us were at home, and we kind of learned, like, what am I going to do? What am I doing for me? We've all been rushing out the door and going from place to place, and this is something good that came out of it. A book came out of it. Now, did you say that you wrote 2 books?
2 books. So I didn't bring the other one. The other book is called The Accidental Gangster, Dutch Schultz and Me. Wow. And maybe another time I'll have a presentation at the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center, because it's all about gangsters. My grandfather's, true story, my grandfather ran booze for the gangster Dutch Schultz. And this is his story. Again, during COVID, I sort of look back. I remember my mother. My mother had already passed a few years, but she had, during her lifetime, spent some time talking about her father. My own father talked about his father-in-law, not always in the kindest terms. And then, so then some of the things I began to realize, I mean, my grandfather was in a dangerous business. But we Americans, and Canadians, and there are other parts of the world, where you romanticize gangsters. And they really were, and we had a bunch of different kinds of gangsters in this country. The booze runners were the ones like my grandfather. There was a small group of them. And what's the most important thing to remember about Prohibition is it put the organized in organized crime. There was always crime. There will always be crime, no matter where you are. But they became organized because the amount of money that was made during Prohibition was so astounding that it gave rise to this incredible organized crime where they were more interested in not killing each other because it was bad for business. So that was, although there are plenty of examples of the gangsters killing one another, and Dutch Schultz I talk about in the book, and the stories about Dutch Schultz and Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano, these are actually true stories. And I did my research by reading old copies of the New York Daily News from the 1920s and 30s. And there were also some newspapers that were from Albany and Syracuse and New York and a couple of other places, because the stories were taking place. And even though those newspapers are dead, I was able to kind of find online an ability to get to read that. So it was a heyday, I think, not for kind of romanticizing gangsters, because the newspapers went along with that. Until, of course, they might kill a couple of innocent children on the street with their machine guns. But outside of that, there was this whole romance about it. I talk a little bit about some of the gangsters in Chicago and Detroit, but and I also speak about Mickey Cohn, who's a famous California gangster. And they had little networks. I mean, most of the gangsters and the big gangs that start to organize are based on ethnicity, much smaller degree racial, and different groups had different gangs. So there was the Italians, there was the Irish, there was the Jewish guys, there was the Slavic guys, there were some African-American gangsters in Harlem. And I speak about many of them, and hopefully you'll walk away with a sense about who my grandfather was, but also what the times were like.
That sounds fascinating.
So I'll come back for a different program. We can talk about gangsters. Everybody likes gangsters. And my grandfather was the accidental gangster because he was a fisherman, and what they wanted was his boats. And that's how he got recruited to work for Dutch Schultz. And it lasted, well, Prohibition lasted from 1920 to 1933, wow, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president in 1932, and he eliminated Prohibition. He pushed forward to get an amendment to end Prohibition. And the reason, the rationale for it had to do with the fact that they wanted to tax the booze and put it into the state and federal coffers. And in 1931, the state of Nevada was completely, absolutely broke. And what it did was it legalized gambling. Mm. And it took a few years, and actually these same gangsters that I'm talking about in my book, in 1947, Bugsy Siegel opens up the Flamingo in Las Vegas.
Will that be your sequel, going to Las Vegas?
No, I don't know about that. That's an interesting idea. I actually, you know, this is the thing about writing. If you really want to write, you keep on writing, you keep on writing. Every day you write a little bit. That's the idea. I'm already started my next book. And again, it's taking some of my family history. I've gone back into that and make a kind of a war novel about.
Oh, okay.
So the Forgotten War, and that is, in our estimate, World War I. We basically, we didn't fight in it for very long, but it was a monumental world war, which led a couple of years later, 20 years later, to World War II.
Right, right.
And some of the stuff that was happening in World War I is actually part of the insanity of what's going on now between Russia and Ukraine. Because during what World War I, when it ended the Russian czars and the Russian Empire, and over the next few years, then of course the Soviet Union is developed. But some of the kind of warring that went on in places like Ukraine and Russia start way back when. And Crimea was always Russian. In fact, they had Russian military places there since, you know, the 19th century when the Russians were fighting different groups. And in 1964, Khrushchev, who was then the Soviet premier, gave Crimea to Ukraine, never imagining for a moment that it would ever be independent and that it would then want to keep Crimea. And in some of my books I write about Yalta. You know, that's where the presidents met during World War II, and where Russians, until fairly recently, used to vacation in Crimea at Yalta and along the beaches there. So World War I, often forgotten, is actually a base point for lots of things that we're living through now, and we, you know, don't have a clue. So, you know, that's a kind of, anyway, so that's what I'm thinking about next.
That's your next one. And how many other books have you written?
I write under a pen name, Anastasia Goodman. I write a crime series.
And how many?
I have 3 published crime novels
Okay.
based on my Russian-born police detective, Sasha Perloff. I'm really very connected into this kind of Russia stuff because I am Russian.
Right.
So Russian and Hungarian and some Polish. But Polish, just like Ukrainian, at one time in the history of the world was basically Russian. I mean, Russia, even before the Soviet Union, Russia dominated certain parts of the world under the czars, for better or worse. And then when the czars ended, they were all, the last one was assassinated in I think 1918. There was a new world order, and it gave rise to other crazy people doing terrible things in the world. So I like to put in a little history. So my crime novels have history in them. They talk about my character. Again, I'm making this stuff up, you know, more so with the crime novels than actually in the 2 recent books, is a character, Sasha Perloff, who was born in the Soviet Union and born to a mother who was a Russian dissident, who was imprisoned and tortured by the Soviet authorities. And Putin is actually in the novel because he is such an important 21st century figure in Russian life. And they go back to Stalingrad, where the great epic battle was during World War II, because again, I'm making this up, my Sasha Perloff, his grandfather was the hero of the Battle of Stalingrad. So we go to Stalingrad, and then the second one is Death and Diamonds, and I take you to Jerusalem, which is the center in the world of uncut diamonds. Uncut diamonds are an international currency. And the third one was The Terrorist, which was about my Sasha Perloff interrogating a woman who's thought to be a terrorist. And a side trip, I take you to Belarus, because that's actually where part of my family's from. And he visits an old relative, and she talks about when the Nazis came and how people were able to survive.
So what do you think is, for you, do you write fiction faster or nonfiction faster? Which is easier for you? Where does it?
Well, I think that the fiction's easier, but because I'm more willing to throw it away. So if I write 1,000 words, I take 500 and throw it away.
Right.
If I was doing something nonfiction where I was doing research and stuff, I'd be less likely to do anything like that. So it's much more free-flowing. And usually when you're writing nonfiction, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. When I write fiction, I don't always have that in mind when I start. Right. This book, because it takes place in a very specific point in time, has a beginning, middle, and end. And to some degree, the Accidental Gangster, of course, has a beginning, middle, and end. But the other fiction, no. I start to write Sasha, and he's going on an exploit, and I'm not always sure where it's going to end in terms of the novel. And when I wrote it originally and always as a series. So one story builds on another. So it starts with loose ends, and then it evolves more, and you get to know Sasha and his family. You get to know some people in the police department better. By the time we get to The Terrorist, you really do know Sasha, his family. Again, but not necessarily knowing exactly the way it's meant to end.
Right. And with Rockaway Riptides, did any of your high school classmates read this, or did? I bet it would be great to go back to a reunion and meet some of the people.
It's funny you said that because last night somebody sent me an email about we're going to have a school reunion.
That would be amazing. I mean, it'd be really interesting.
And
I mean,
this, I don't think you're going to be able to see it. This is a picture of my high school. And this is where the reunion's going to actually take place.
Does it still look like that?
Yes.
It hasn't changed at all?
Well, I don't know what they've done in the interior, but it was built in the 1920s. Wow. I talk about it in actually The Accidental Gangster, because when that is taking place in the 20s is when the high school is first built.
Wow, that's unusual.
So it's not a high school anymore.
Oh, okay. What is it?
Who knows?
But you're holding it. They're holding it there.
That's what they want to do. That's the email that I was sent that said they actually want to hold it. Right. In the high school itself. So the interior must be presentable enough that people don't have to be afraid that the walls are going to collapse.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yes. Right. It is kind of bizarre, but yes, it's funny you should say that. But what happened when the book was first came out is, well, two things happened. One, my brother, who's brilliant, said there must be some kind of website where you have Far Rockaway High School people. And he found it for me. Wow. And so I did send emails to the people that I could find their emails.
Right.
Some said yes, some said no. And then I mentioned earlier I belonged to just a group of nice ladies we call the Mystic Nice Girls.
Yeah.
And one of them is pretty good with that Zoom stuff. And she launched the book by having this big Zoom. Oh. And I found people that I knew from, as a kid, growing up and going to high school with. Right. And so we invited them, and I actually saw, through this Zoom, some classmates I haven't seen in literally 50 years.
Oh, that must have been so nice.
Oh, my God, yes.
Wow. Did you talk about this issue at all with them?
Oh, with the book?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What were their memories? Did you feel they were as affected as you had been?
No. Well, some of them actually ended up going to Vietnam after they finished college, because most of them had gone off to college. In fact, mothers kept kids in college who probably didn't deserve to be there, but just to keep them out of the war, because that was a deferment.
Right.
But well, somebody asked me. Somebody did identify the real name of the person who actually died.
Okay.
So he knew who it was.
Right.
And then other people said they were amazed at my memory, that I could remember such small details about the characters. And of course, the main character is a girl named Cece, which is me and lots of other people that I sort of made a composite about.
Right.
But other people recognize things, like the editor of our little newspaper actually used to keep a pencil around her ear, and I remember
you
that.
put
always.
that in.
I did. I remember.
Well, you
that.
would remember that. That's
yes,
kind of unusual,
these
right?
That's, I think, makes an interesting novelist.
Yes.
Is that you can remember these kind of little tidbits, and you can, I can find a way to put them in the book.
I have a question. Did you journal when you were younger that you remember so much?
No, I don't think so. I've been writing for. In high school, I wrote a little bit, but not really. Mm-hmm. When I got to college, I was on the school newspaper.
Okay.
And so I was writing from then for the 4 years that I went to school. And then over the years, I've written all kinds of stuff. And I've started and stopped writing fiction before, and put it aside. And it really wasn't until, I guess, 2010 that I actually started to really seriously. I had the time.
Right, that's what it is.
I had the time. I had retired from a job, and I was doing all kinds of work, but I had control over it, and that's when I started to write, and again, you need time to kind of think about stuff, and I just sort of remember things because I love the beach, and the picture here is the boardwalk. And that's part of living in the Rockaways, was this 12 miles of beautiful boardwalk, which is also written about in Accidental Gangster, because in the 1920s is when the city of New York, first started to create that boardwalk.
Right.
So there are all these kinds of links. Anybody who's interested in the Rockaways, which is an interesting place, I mean, there is this continuous history. It was completely destroyed by Superstorm Sandy. And then, in more recent times, it was started to be rebuilt, but was not rebuilt the way it originally had been built, with rusty nails and wood. They made it now as a compost, and you can't get under the boardwalk anymore. They've kind of made a design so that it's impossible to do so. I think to some extent that's always been an issue of the homeless. And kids would be running around there, but they usually didn't spend weeks and months under the boardwalk. Right. But of course there was homeless people. And the other character in this book, which is based on a real person, is one of these people. We're talking now in 1960s, a homeless guy who we really didn't know much about him, but he used to ride a 3-wheeled bicycle, and he used to sing. He had a songbook. He's a terrible singer, but this is who he was. And people who have read the book knew immediately who I was talking about. I changed his name, of course, and I gave him a backstory, which we as kids never knew.
Right.
But
right.
he had to have some kind of interesting backstory, so we made that. So that people recognized if they knew the school and knew the place, they knew that. And then the teachers. I talk about the teachers. In fact, somebody sent me an email after they read it and said they're the principal of the school. I call her Miss O'Brien. Her name was actually Miss Ryan. Oh. And somebody wrote me and said, "Miss Ryan, how come you liked her so much?" She said, "She was nothing but an old drunk." Oh.
Did you like her? Did you like her?
Yes, I did. I did, because she did. She was, the mid-'60s were like, not only was it Vietnam War, but if you lived in the New York City area, it was like complete turmoil. Because in 1965, John Lindsay, who was a Republican from the Silk Stocking District, which was the Upper East Side of Manhattan, was elected mayor of New York. And people loved him or they hated him. Now, I was from the love category, because I don't say it in the book, but years after I graduated college, I went to work for the Lindsay administration. So I always thought he was a failed politician, but he had good ideas. A lot of people just wouldn't let him fulfill those the dreams he had for the city of New York, which I think would have been better with him rather than against him. But so he's in there, and then there's the teachers will later, a couple of years later, go on strike, and so the whole school system is in disarray. And part of that is, and that's why I picked our principal, is the change from these Irish spinsters who may or may not have been born in the United States, who come to become teachers and rise to the ranks to become principals of their high school. Versus what happens in a couple of years later is they're replaced by these better educated, in some cases holding PhDs, white men. And that's who became our new, and that's what happened. Our Miss Ryan, she's gone. Mr. Gordon comes in. Mr. Gordon is better educated, a white man, and he changes the direction of the high school. Where the high school was considered to be, in Miss Ryan's day, a community, and that the students were like her children, it becomes more of a business. And so there's unions and there's regulations and things have to be followed. So the school system changes, and it doesn't change for the better. And I still think that problem remains. And then, of course, the other thing that's happening in New York City is the composition of the population starts to change. We go from a predominantly white middle class to a increasingly people of color, many people who are poorer. Then there are people who make money off of this white flight that happens in New York City. People start to run to the suburbs, Nassau, Suffolk, out to New Jersey, north to Westchester, and you start to see a whole change. And then by the 1970s, the city of New York is on its knees, and it's only through some good guidance that finally it reemerges, and then it becomes fashionable for young, well-educated people of all classes, all races, all ethnicities to come and live in the city again. And so they reclaim the city. Well, it'd be interesting to see what happens with COVID, because a lot of people left the city, went out into the suburbs, whether they're going to like that as something they want to do for the rest of their lives, or maybe come back and live in the city. I mean, I think we're in for a transition which no one ever expected, and I don't think anybody truly knows what the outcome is actually going to be. So it's been interesting.
Well, I think it's interesting because it's kind of an analogy. It would be if a high school student who lived through COVID wrote a book about what that was like as a student. It's kind of what you were going through as a student during a time that we often look back at. So
I think that's a wonderful analogy. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting to hear what they have to say.
I would very much hope that teachers around the country, or even around the world, would encourage, particularly their high school students, to start writing about how it felt. And maybe there's a whole bunch of angst about kids who coming back to school who may have been a little bit on the outs before COVID, and now they're even more reluctant to go back to school. I think it'd be useful for all of society if we got to find out what these kids are actually thinking about.
Well, expectations changed. Children who thought they were going to be going to a prom, thought they were going to be having their senior year, and then their parents' expectations as well. And even for the child, a child knows about a prom, but it's a parent who's been to one, who wants to see their child go to the prom. There was just so much loss. And I think that that's another reason why it's wonderful to have that writing class, because getting over loss writing can help a lot with that.
Yes,
And we've all experienced a lot of loss. I actually, we don't have it started yet, but I wanted to start a bereavement group because I'm getting calls from people who have lost their spouse or a family member, and they're now wondering, what am I going to be doing now? It's just so many changes. And so with the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center, we have a beautiful space that you see, and maybe you could even speak about just the room itself, with so much light in that room and the windows. It's always warm and sunny, and it's just a place where you can be creative. And I know we have painting in there, and the writing, the yoga, the Tai Chi, but I'd like to see more support groups as well, because it just should be a place where people can be safe and come and speak and talk about the changes that have occurred dramatically for a lot of people.
I think that's really good. And it's not only older people who lost.
Yes.
It's young children who have lost parents.
Yes.
And that's that's part of this book, Rockaway Riptides, because I really do pick on and describe 3 kids who lost their parents through an assortment of different issues, and they create, in the book, the Dead Parents Society.
Wow.
And that is actually based on some real truth about how in high school a number of my fellow students lost their parents through accidents, through disease, not always unexpected, but still that when a kid loses their mother, sometimes even their father when they're young like that, it scars you for life. I can imagine that there are young people whose parents or grandparents have gone and they were major people in their lives, what kind of loss that would be.
Right, and we also have a lot of grandparents who are raising grandchildren. So that's another group that we've started a support group for. We do have an ongoing group for caregivers right now, and we wrote it broadly so that it could be someone who is there with a spouse. Initially, it was for a spouse because I didn't get into this very much, but at the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center, our social service agency is primarily run by senior volunteers. So when COVID hit, we had 300 volunteers and we had 0 for a while. I would say of that number, 25% came back. So primarily because if folks are in their late 80s, which they were, a lot has happened in the last 2 years. And so some did come back, but some didn't. We now see a lot of those people who have moved into our area who are about 55 to 65 or have recently retired, because as you know, a lot of people retired earlier than they thought that they would. And it's really nice that they want to continue to give back. And so they're working in our food pantry, at the front desk, and in our thrift store. So the thrift store is open Monday through Friday, and that's run by one paid person and all volunteers. And so they're very busy. We get so many donations, and they steam everything. We don't take anything if it has a spot. If there's any type of problem with the clothing, we'll then give it to another agency like Salvation Army. So it all goes to charity. But this is a way for us to have everyone come into the PNC. So there's no type of stigma as far as who's going there. Who's out of work right now, who might need help with heating assistance, for example, because someone might be at the front desk to help with heat, someone might be taking a yoga class, someone might be buying a dress to go on a job interview. People are there for so many different reasons. And I will say that with COVID, I think that at least as a local society, people don't have as much stigma as far as realizing that it could be anyone at any time who's suddenly unemployed and needs some help. And that's what we try to do, is give a little extra food or a little extra help with heating, for example, or a gas card if you need to get to work. And it's nice that those who are working or those who do have the means to help are able to donate the way that they do. So I feel like the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center is a very unusual place in that it really is neighbors helping neighbors. It's such a cliche phrase. I didn't make it up. They started it 40 years ago, but don't you think that's really what it is? I mean, you live in Westerly, I live in Mystic, where it's people that we know who are there from every end, and when you're in a better spot, when you have a job or you're in a place where you can help someone else, you will.
Yes.
So that's how we look at it.
No, I think you're right, and the communities that we live in have really been changing because of COVID.
Right.
And sometimes I think to some extent it's actually for the betterment of the community, because they are younger. In some cases, they're better educated and had more income, although they may be willing to live slightly at a lower income just because they want to get away. And that has changed. That has changed Westerly, I think, for sure. I'm less familiar with Mystic and Stonington, but I know Westerly has changed with these people, and it's really for the better, because they bring in new ideas. And some new ideas are good, some not everything is good, but just the infusion of new ideas, new ways of thinking, which has been advantageous for the community at large.
Yeah, and I think, with change, there's always good. It's wonderful to have new people here. Also, it's been difficult for people trying to find affordable housing, though, of course. So that's another thing that we are working with people. That's just hard. We might be able to help with rental assistance, but it's finding that house or that apartment, especially for a family with children. So, it's life changes, and I think that's what your book shows, is with every age we have our struggles and we have our victories, and today is no different than any other time in history. And I think that all we ever really have is each other, and to keep our stories alive so that we can learn from the past, right? That's the only way that we learn.
Absolutely. I mean, we've had several world wars. I mean, we've had some really catastrophic things happen to the world at large, but to some extent, they were human-induced. In other, people wanted to take over the world in some kind of fashion, an individual, a group of people. In this case, it's a disease that has taken over the world, something that, although I have a dear friend who unfortunately passed away this past year, not from COVID, but he was a virologist, and he told us decades ago, he said, what's going to kill the earth is going to be viruses. And he identified the cause. He said, when humans and livestock, whether they're pigs or monkeys, live too close to humans, that's when you get some kinds of viruses that are so lethal. And he said that like 20, 25 years ago. He's talking about AIDS and stuff, where there is some discussion where it might have been, again, a transferal from an animal to human, because people live too close to livestock. And it may be that this particular also got caused by that. Maybe there was some kind of monkey, who knows what the actual origins will. They'll eventually find out.
Yeah, I don't know. But I just think that we're just doing what we can, you and I, to be there. You offering your classes is really wonderful. I think that folks are going to love the presentation that you're putting on. I want to say it again because, so it's Thursday, and maybe we can put it up again. It's Thursday, March 31st, and this is at 11 a.m. in the lunchroom at the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center. It's open to everyone, and we will be serving a hot lunch at no cost. And when you do come, I think you'll see some of the other things that we have going on, like the coffee house for the veterans, as well as our crafting clubs and the many classes that we mentioned.
And your incredible thrift shop.
And the store, thank you.
My students in the writing class, they close every single class with, they say, oh, we got to go upstairs and look and see what they got in the thrift store.
I know,
said,
it is.
Oh,
it's
they
awesome.
said, this,
it really
you know,
is.
the two big thrift stores, Johnny Cake Center, and they say, oh, this one's better than the Johnny Cake Center. So we've got a bunch of my classes. They go up there and they go shopping.
It's very small, so it's very boutique-like. So we're very lucky that that our manager, Barbara Hessling, can really do a beautiful job with that. Yeah, she does a great job. Thank you.
And then downstairs, when you leave the building, there's always packaged bread.
Yes, well,
And
that. Okay, thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, that's because every day we have a truck that goes out, and we go to the local supermarkets, and we take their day-old produce and bread, and then we also get donations from other stores like McQuaid's. And so, and for example, just Bakery Sift in downtown Mystic, 2 weeks ago came with a truckload of fresh bread. Like, I can't. You just really see the goodness in the hearts of everyone when you work at the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center, and you're starting to see it too. I mean,
Yes,
all donations.
absolutely.
It's unbelievable.
Yes, just and the class people say, oh, on your way out, don't forget and take a bread. And when they first said that to me, I thought, well, maybe it's like, slices of bread or something. And then I saw what they're talking about. It looks like, I mean, it may be day old, but it looks really good. It's all packaged. Yeah. Nobody's been nibbling at it or anything like that. It's beautiful, all kinds of different kinds of bread, expensive kinds of bread.
So what happens is you have to sign up. You have to show that. You just have to sign that you meet the federal regulations for wage income. And then once you do that, every time you come in, you just show your card, and then you have access to the milk and the eggs and all the produce and the bread and everything. So it's like you're going shopping for the week. However, if we have extra bread, like you're talking about, we do put it out at a table, and people can come in any time and pick that up. I want to explain how that works, but yes, that is. And the same goes for in the summer. A lot of times we'll have something like tomatoes. When everyone has tomatoes in their garden, we have so much that we'll put it out, and people will come and take it. And we also deliver every week to Stonington housing complexes and to the North Stonington Senior Center. So we actually bring food to certain places as well.
Do you provide lunches every day? No.
We provide lunch 5 days a week for the seniors. So that means 62 and over. And then we also deliver Meals on Wheels to Stonington residents 5 days a week, and that's volunteers coming and getting. Those are meals. That's upstairs, and then downstairs is the pantry.
Yeah.
So in a lot of different ways.
Well, anyway, it was great to speak with you.
Thank you.
And you have a wonderful organization that deserves our support. So do come to my writing class on Wednesdays at the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center downstairs, 11 o'clock, because my writers tell me that they don't want to wake up at 10 o'clock, so it's 11 o'clock. So come on out. And then at the end of the month, March 31st, Thursday, 11 o'clock, is that wonderful program we want to do, David and myself, to honor and salute Vietnam War veterans, because Tuesday is actually National Vietnam War Veterans Day nationwide. Can't forget about these guys and gals. There's 55,000 bodies. And you can see that in the Washington at the memorial, a few of the nurses who also gave their lives. We shouldn't forget them. They're part of our history, and hopefully we can learn from some of our escapades. I mean, we have the capacity to learn. And I want to thank Susan for being my guest.
Thank you for inviting me.
I hope to see her again. And I want to thank everybody for watching. And this is Harriet Grayson, your host and your producer of Community Culture Showcase. Come back and see us again real soon. Bye-bye.